South Ripley, which is where I'm from. So this one does not say 1954 on it. But to go on to play along with this sermon, along with what he shared, what he didn't talk about last week was how they kind of won the game. And I'm not going to diss on Milan at all because they won. And Zenas doesn't have a state championship museum or anything, so Milan has a heads up on us. All right? So, anyways, they stalled the ball. But to stall the ball, right, and they did it for a long time, you had to be on offense, though. I mean, they were on their side of the court, and they held the ball for an awful long time. I don't know the cool facts about it. And then we all know who shot the last shot. Bobby Plump, right? If you want to meet him, he's still alive and in Milan, and you just look for the statue and the shrines and all that stuff, and you'll find him. No, I'm just kidding. It's not that crazy. But I feel like it's a big deal that we play offense sometimes, because many times in the church realm, especially the spiritual realm, we're on defense. We're like, well, I think I'm just going to be this Christian that's going to play defense. And until somebody ruffles my feathers about my Christianity, I'm probably not going to talk to you about it. And quite frankly, I'm not going to question it. I'm just going to play defense. I'm going to go to church and get strengthened. But oftentimes, we all know, we know that defense wins championships. You hear that in football. But yet, you have to score a point to win. I don't know if you knew that in sports. And I feel like God's ready for the church today to play more offense. Because really, quite frankly, it gets boring just playing defense. And I like basketball an awful lot. Matter of fact, we won our first game this week. I'm going to brag on the little Zenas Warriors for a second. It was against a team that hasn't won either, so somebody had to win. I'm going to be honest with you, that's the truth. But it was a battle, and we scored more points than them because we had to play some offense. I enjoy playing offense. I also enjoy playing defense. And you got to have both. And I feel like, we need to be playing more offense. As much as I think defense wins, everybody likes to shoot the ball because in the paper and the stats, it doesn't say Johnny stopped this guy from going to the basket 4 times. It doesn't say that. It says, oh, this person had this many points. This person had that many points. So the world brags on offense in sports. Soccer is another good example of actually you're in a spot sometimes where you just play defense. And when you're not very athletic and you're very slow, like I was, I played a lot of the defensive position. Because they're like, where can we put this guy to hurt us the least? It's not even the guy that's in front of the goal. It's the guy over here on the side in case the ball goes over there. He's so slow, but if he takes the right angle, he can get there in time, right? That's me. So I understand the whole sports part about playing offense and defense, but I like to play offense. And I think that needs to spread a little bit into our lives today. So let's get to it with prayer. God, I just thank you so much for how much you've blessed us, God. We have more than 10,000 reasons to say thank you, but very seldom do we use even 4 of them. And God, I just thank you for all that you do give. I thank you that it's all about you. You give, you take away, you're everything. And when we think we have control, we're only fooling ourselves. But God, you call us to be on the offense, not just on the defense. So God, I give just a sermon to you, God. I pray that you just use it to help us excited and grow us to want to be on the offensive end. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So it does relate to sports, and you can relate to that. There's some thrill in the playing. And although in football it's a little different because I always wanted to be that 250-pound pure muscle that plays linebacker. Obviously never got there. But that would be cool also to play that. But I don't know if you knew this, but even after you become a Christian, because it takes some offense to do that. You have to believe and put your faith and trust and control, and you give it to God. Even after that, there are times you're going to need to play some defense and grow yourself strong, but there's definitely times that God says, listen, I need you to go now and play offense. I need you to go and spread this love of mine and go and be an offensive player for me. And because sometimes we just struggle, and it's hard. But the boldness to play offense only comes from God. So if you think, well, I'm just going to go out and conquer the world on my own, it ain't happening. But to pray and to conquer something. I'm not going to ask how many of you made the New Year's resolution deal and you've already failed. But I really feel like the reason that we fail so much in our New Year's resolutions is because we're trying to play defense. We think we can have a comfortable resolution. It's like, well, if I can just sit back, then this will all come natural to me. But that's still not the way it works. So this year in 2018, I took my number one sin that I struggle with. Everybody's got one, whether you want to admit it or not. You have something that you struggle with. And I've always been like the defensive player. Well, I'll put this here, or I'll try to not do it as much, or the thing I struggle with, I'm just going to play defense. And I've tried that for, knowingly about 30 years now. And it's still a huge struggle at times. But this 2018, although I've made it, what's today, the 14th? 14 days, and doing well, I actually claim that too. I have no time to think about sinning because with 2 children and they're crying, you get no sleep, and there's just no time for that right now. But I've decided, what if you try to go after your sin that you struggle with in 2018? That at the end of the year you said, I played offense, I've prayed, I've said, God, I declare victory over this. I don't want to have to deal with this anymore. What if after 1 year, I'm going to give you a whole year here, that if you could play offense and go after the sin rather than saying, well, that sin's bothered me for years and I struggle with it. What if you try to change? Now, this is a process like anything else, like trying to quit a bad habit or anything else. Playing offense as a Christian is also a habit that you have to develop. And ask God for help and say, God, listen, I'm ready to play some more offense because honestly, we get tired and we get bored as a church playing defense. And our community is one of those ways that we can go out and we can play offense. But to play offense, we got to realize who we're fighting against. So again, I'm not fighting against you all or the people out in the community that don't believe or anybody else. I'm fighting against the devil, literally, and I have to know who I'm playing offense against because there's no sense, you got to have a game plan, right? So in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 1 through 6, Paul's talking here to the people of Corinth and he's saying, listen, it's time for you guys to do something about what you're struggling with, right? It's time for me to do something about what I'm struggling with. And in chapter 10, verse 1 through 6, it says, Now I, Paul, I appeal to you with gentleness and kindness of Christ. Though I realize you think I am a timid in person and bold only when I write from far away. Well, I am begging you now so that when I come, I won't have to be bold with those who think we act from human motives. So actually, Paul's kind of going on the defense and saying, listen, you don't really want me to be as bold as I am in my letters to you up in person. And this is the kind of way I feel at times too. I could probably write you all a letter more easier than I could confront you about something, just for the record. But then he goes on to say, we are human, is this version. The King James Version says we walk in the flesh, right? So we are human. And that's the first step of everything. Realizing, listen, this offensive game plan goes nowhere until you realize that you're just a human, right? That you realize that you're a sinner just like everybody else, and that you're no better than anyone else, and that we struggle. But then it says, but we don't wage war as humans do. That's the way I feel like in 2018, we need to wage war on the things that we're struggling with in the sinful nature. Rather than saying, well, I've struggled with that for years. Or it's, oh, I've swept it under the rug long enough. It's time to wage war as a church on sin. It's time to wage war as Christians against sinful nature and the things that we struggle with, right? And this is all talking about personally first. You've got to get yourself at war against the real enemy, the devil, first. And then it says, and that huge word there, wage war, I feel like that's just what's missing in my life. Like, I've never looked at like, oh, today I'm waking up. Is this a battleground where I'm waging war? It says it's supposed to be, but we got to remember that the devil's not stopping. He's on the offense against us, right? And we have to be defensive against that. But there's times when we got to be on the offensive end of things and go the other way. And it says we use God's mighty weapons. So this is our weapons. This is what we're using. Not worldly weapons to knock down the strongholds of human reasoning and to destroy false arguments. And I think this is where we may not take offense enough, is where, we don't realize that God gives us a ton of weapons to use, right? His Word, His Spirit, so many things. And that we need to be on the offense, because it says to knock down the strongholds of human reasoning. That doesn't mean sit back behind those strongholds and wait for them to get to us. No, it says you got to knock those down, right? Or knock it off is another way to look at it. And to destroy all the false arguments. And then it says, we destroy every proud obstacle that keeps people from knowing God. That's an offensive thing there, right? It says we destroy. We're going after that. We capture their rebellious thoughts and teach them to obey Christ. We capture, again, a very offensive term there that's being used. We capture our thoughts. And then we teach them. It doesn't say sit back and be like, oh, my thoughts are all over the place. I hope they get better someday, even after watching these 14 movies that promote these thoughts, right? No, you capture them, you go after them. And it says, after you've become fully obedient, we will punish everyone who remains disobedient. And that goes into a whole different area. But Paul is talking about waging war and being on the offense. And as I think about this more and more, I think, man, I haven't ever looked at this, that we need to do something proactive, right? We need to do something about these things. We just want to point out everybody else's fault. But really God's saying, no, I want you to be proactive, to wage war on the things that you struggle with. And it's something that we really need to do. It's something that I want to teach my kids. Listen, I don't want you to just wait and be on defense. I want them to be on offense, be proactive with that, taking care of the things that need to be taken care of. And if that steps on some toes, it definitely steps on mine, because I have some things. And once I feel like I've played enough offense and I'm working on that, guess what? There's the next thing that's going to come in and tempt me. Got to work on playing offense again. And then it says, of course, you know, in Ephesians 6, it talks about the spiritual battle that we face. But the waging war, that we do not war after the flesh, is the second part of that verse. We can go back to verse 3, if you would, Lori. In that it says, we're human, but we don't wage war. Or it says in the King James Version, we do not war after the flesh. Basically, it says strictly, I like this commentary, we are not carrying on our campaign. So this isn't, I like that word campaign too. It's like, it's an excited journey. It's a war against something, right? We're not doing it on our own terms. Because as a human, quite frankly, I don't want to face the devil, right? I don't want to face the things of this world. I don't want to play offense. But that's not our campaign. Once you become a Christian, you're now fighting on God's side, on His campaign. It says every Christian's life is a warfare with Satan and his principalities and his powers, with the world, the men and lusts of it, and with the corruptions of their own hearts. Don't forget, we're going to be fighting against ourselves here also. Because the work of the ministry is spiritual warfare with spiritual enemies and for spiritual purposes. Going ahead and doing Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12, just as a reminder to us who you're fighting. For we are not fighting against the flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world, against mighty powers in the dark world, and against evil spirits in the heavenly places. So make sure you know that this wage war thing means, listen, it's time to play some offense a little more. And so when you become a Christian, you're like, well, things should get easier, right? The temptations that come, I can defeat them easier. No, that's your chance to grow. And God's going to use you in those things. He says, listen, I'm going to grow you, but you're going to have to face things to grow. Just like your New Year's resolutions, they're going to be tough to grow in a Christian spiritual way as well. But it doesn't mean that the war is over once you become a Christian. And I think that's where we forget. And that's why we play a lot of defense and sit back. The term, or the sermon today is a river to cross. And every man has a river to cross. If you could show the picture of George there. We got George Washington here on his boat with his men crossing the Delaware River. Now, I'm not a huge history guy, so you're going to have to stick with me here, but the story is absolutely amazing. This was actually on Christmas Day, actually it's Christmas evening, this was after dark, they obviously couldn't show that in the picture. But this was 1776. Now, I just realized a little bit, this didn't add up to me very well. Because the Declaration of Independence, when I thought we became a country, right, July 4th, 1776. This is after that, a few months later. And if you are a lot big into history and I've said something wrong, I'll apologize next week and you can talk to me afterwards. But from what I gather, we signed our independence, and then it says, these guys are going to war against the British, right? And what happened here was, actually things looked pretty bleak. And I read in this book about a quote that was given. It says, a week before Christmas, Thomas Paine penned The American Crisis. All right, this is the year of our independence. This is the year we're free, we're our own country. he said this isn't quite what was happening at the time. It says, he penned the American crisis. It proved to be the right words at the right time, reviving all the Continental Army. Listen to these words, and I don't have them on the board, I apologize. These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country. But he that stands by it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered, yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. And it actually says, you know, the American Revolution at this time seemed like a lost cause, actually, to most people. And after a demoralizing string of defeats, many members of the George Washington's army had deserted him, which we see all the time, right, in biblical ways. So here's what was happening at the time. Our country's in trouble, right? And it's Christmas Day of all times, and the enemy's on the other side of the Delaware. They're camped out. They're probably having a pretty good party because it's Christmas Day, right? And they're not thinking anybody's coming. So what happened was, George here decides to go on offense rather than sit on his side of the river all the time and wait for them to come to him. He's like, listen, I have a plan. This is why he was probably our first president. I have a plan. Let's go after the enemy. And I feel like that's the way we need to be as Christians. And to be honest with you, this is just like a dramatized picture of a painting that what might have happened, right? Because these guys are boring and stuff, and George has his, like, I'm looking straight ahead. But that's the way we need to be at times, is we need to look straight ahead at the battle that's in front of us, rather than look to the side and act like the battle's not there. And that's exactly what was happening with George here. He said, I'm going to take my men. They were kind of outnumbered, and they were like, listen, we're going to go on offense tonight. So when it became dark, he's like, when it becomes dark, he got a makeshift navy to get his people across the Delaware River. I looked it up. The Delaware River is about as wide as the Ohio River, if that gives you any perspective. Okay? So they had to cross that, but the problem was, just like recently, the ice and snow and stuff was in the river. Right? So it wasn't easy to cross this. It wasn't like it was an 85-degree evening, right, and the waters were smooth. This was, they had to chunk around ice to get to the other side of the river, which was really neat. So it was hard to play offense. And today as a church, sometimes you may feel it's hard to play offense, but that's exactly what God's calling from us. But they got across there. About 2 men, it says, died of frostbite, right? But once they got across, they surprised the enemy, so much so that only 3 people in the whole battle died. And I don't know if that includes the 2 from frostbite or not, but they captured like 1,000 prisoners of war on the other side because they weren't expecting it, right? And I feel like, you know, we give the devil a lot of credit, but God says, listen, I'm giving you the weapons of warfare. I give you the truth of my word. I give you my power, my spirit, to go over to the other side and play some offense. It says, when they got to the other side, the paths where they were walking towards the enemy were all bloody because their feet were so frostbitten. Right? This wasn't an easy journey for these guys. And you know how it is with water around, and it's so cold. Their feet were frostbitten. They were all bloody and all over the place. But they went ahead and played offense, and it changed like the attitude, the emotions of the war for the Americans. And some say, without this battle, without this confrontation, we may not have America as it is today. A huge deal. And this comes, months after they signed the Declaration of Independence. It wasn't over yet, right? Just like our spiritual battle is not over yet. We still have to be on offense today. And I love the analogy of this, that every man has a river to cross, right? Whatever it is for you, are you ready to cross the river and play some offense against it? Or are you just sitting back hoping it all gets better? Because that's what I prefer to do. But it just isn't effective. It just doesn't work. And there's a verse that's been translated in 3 different ways. And I'm going to share it with you because I want you to notice the difference in the translations. Some has it as offense, but most of the times it looks as defense in the newer translation. So I'll start out with the New Living Translation, the kind I usually use. Matthew chapter 16, verse 18. It says, these are familiar verses here, a familiar verse. And now I say to you, you are Peter, which means rock. And upon this rock I will build my church, and the powers of hell will not conquer it. He's not saying that Peter's the man. He's saying that Jesus is saying, I, which is Jesus, will build my church, which is Jesus' church. Not just something Peter's going to come up with or what we are. God's going to build his church. And it says, and all the powers of hell will not conquer it. Do you think that sounds like, that last part there, the powers of hell will not conquer it, sounds like an offense or defense type ending there? I feel like it's more of a defense. Because it says, well, they will not conquer it. That means when somebody comes after you, they're not going to conquer it, right? So that's more of a defensive in my opinion. You may see it as an offensive, but going on to the New International Version puts it at the end this way. And the gates of Hades will not overcome it. Another, I feel like, defensive statement here. That it's not going to overcome it. But let's look at the King James Version here. And I believe that, for me, it switches to offense. Now, Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. Right? This is, to me, putting it back on the offense. Right? That we're charging the gates of hell, and the gates of hell cannot stand against the power of God. Period. And that we have like this defensive mentality, the play it safe, the let's be scared of what could happen mentality, when really, in reality, God says, I want you to be like the Hellraiser, going against hell, because it won't prevail against it. What if we looked at our friends, our family that way, right? We cared so much that when we're praying and we realize, hey, I'm praying and it matters. Because the gates of hell, Satan, the enemy, they can't put up enough defense to stop you. It's like God's opening the lane to the basket. All you have to do is go in and shoot the layup. Right? You're going offensively against there. Now you're like, well, why are you using 3 different versions and taking it as you want? That's fine if you want to look at it that way. But either way, I feel like offense needs to be played more in the church. Right? So I look at it as it's time to cross the river. Right? And we have simple stuff like invite people to the YMCA to have a family fun night with us in a couple weeks. Or, invite people to church. I feel like we're getting very visitor friendly. Like, we're doing well. We got work to do, obviously. But let's play offense rather than just being defensive about everything. I know, even as a pastor, I struggle at times being very evangelical, like we want to say. And we're scared to death of that word, honestly, at times. But if I was more offensive and I was praying, God, send me into situations where I can be on the offense. I can tell others about your love, your grace, your mercy, but how amazing it is to be obedient to you, to follow your commands, and to know that the power is with God, the main power. It reminds me, not too long we went to jail, and I'll just call it Danny. Danny went into the cell with someone who was a very well-known, he worshiped the devil, basically, in all areas. Danny couldn't just go in there thinking he was going to play offense, right? And say, I'm going to bring you to Christ. So he had that mentality, but that's only because he was prayed up. He knows who God is, and he knows that power is on his side. I'll be honest, what I did with the cell, kept on walking, right? Someone else was ready to play offense. And somebody else is going to be ready to cross the river. But I believe that God wants to use us. That God wants to use you to say, it's time that we realize that victory is on our side. It's like we play for someone who doesn't win. It's not the Zenas Church League basketball team, everyone. This is God's power that's beside us, right? No offense to all you that plays. I feel since I'm one of the members on the team, I can say that. But listen to this offensive quote, probably one of my favorite, by C.T. Studd. It says, let's see if we can get it up there. Yeah. Some wish to live within the sound of a chapel bell, but I want to run a rescue shop within a yard of hell. You talk about an offensive quote. You want to be inspired every day? Throw that one on your wall or on your refrigerator. Does that sound scary? Yeah. It's not easy. You may get a little frostbitten, right? There may be a blood trail. But guess what? They won, right? They had victory. We're here today. And I believe to leave a legacy, you're not going to leave a legacy for others to follow just playing defense, living within the sounds of the chapel bell. everybody's evangelistic abilities and evangelism will look different. I don't do it the same way as you, and that's fine. But are you on the offense, or are you just playing defense? Sometimes I'm like, I want my son and my daughter now to know that, oh, my dad was brave enough to cross the river, right? He was brave enough to go, and even when it was tough, he was brave enough to say, listen, I struggle with this. I'm going to be very transparent. I struggle with this. I need to make proactive efforts to say, listen, I'm going to declare victory over this. I'm going to declare victory over the bitterness, the anger, the rage, whatever it is that you struggle with. Everybody's got their own thing. But are you willing to cross the river? Maybe crossing the river for you, right, is just saying, listen, I want to get to the other side where Jesus is, right? Or I want Jesus to help me do this. I need to rely on Jesus because I've really never done that before. Because it's a lot easier to come once a week and sit here and within the sound of the chapel bell. But I'm ready now. I pray that's what we're training you to become, is to be disciples, to be going out and spreading the gospel, to cross the river. Because we all know that people out there need someone on the offense to tell them or to show them who Jesus is. That's what we need to do. So I pray, just like George Washington, they already signed the Declaration of Independence, but it wasn't over. There's still a battle. And you may have given your life to Christ. Guess what? It's time to battle, right? It's time to go in there. But you can only do it, not against the flesh and blood. And you can only do it through Christ, right? Through Christ, you can do all things. It's not on your own. You can have all the weapons you want, but you're going to get completely murdered if you go out there on your own. But with Christ, he gives you those spiritual weapons. I'm excited to what God's going to do. I'm excited that he shows us, listen, I don't want you to be just on the defense. I don't want you to stall on the ball. I'm ready for you to go into offensive mode because it's a lot more fun to play offense. Let's pray. God, I just thank you that you want us to wage war, to cross the river, God, to claim new ground in 2018 and beyond. And I pray we leave a legacy as a church that doesn't just sit here inside the chapel bells, but we're a church that crosses the river. And it hurts, and it's going to be hard, and it can even be bloody at times. But God, you call us for such a time as this. You put us here for this exact reasons. God, you put us as a church members and these people coming together on a Sunday for a reason, that we can encourage each other and help each other and pray for each other. God, most of all, help us to rely on you and your strength and your mercy and your grace. To put our trust in Jesus, the only way, God, that we're going to be able to cross any river without getting demolished. God, I'm so thankful for what you do. God, help us just realize the power of who you are. If there's anyone that doesn't know you today, God, I pray that they do. They just try you, to just give their trust and their faith to you, to believe in you. God, you are the way. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. The other cool thing